of those people who fundamentally believe entrepreneurship is also about solving problems.
Hi everyone, this is 𝗪𝗏 and we are on the 13th episode of Entrepreneur Wild, and we at Entrepreneur Wild, we bring stories to empower and inspire the next generation of Sri Lankan entrepreneurs. So today with us we have an amazing guest, a very interesting personality. Been trying to get him for quite a long time but unable to get through. We had different schedules, but today finally we meet, and the amazing personality is none other than Lahiru Pathmalal. Before Takas, that's 7 to 8 years, or 7 to 8 jobs that you did in those few years, or 7 years actually. Why was that? Was there any specific reason, or it was just you were experimenting a few things?
So, I guess I never thought about it actually. I know you sent some of these questions before, but I didn't. So I'll tell you, I mean, out of college you had to work, right? Out of university, I want to do a master's. So first few jobs was to figure out where I wanted to do the master's. Whether I did psychology as well as politics, so I wanted to figure out whether I want to work in politics or whether I want to work in psychology. So I worked both jobs. Then decided I wanted to pursue, from an academic standpoint, political science. So I did my master's there. Then subsequently, obviously, I wanted to work on the field, like a conflict area. So I went to Afghanistan for that. The primary reason was, I think during that time also the war was going on here, but I'm a Sinhalese, right? So the conflict dynamic is different when you are the majority, right? Even though we are getting casualties and there's bantering on both sides. So in Afghanistan, I would have been more of a neutral observer, let's say. Then I got involved with some, I guess, policy making at the Institute of Policy Studies, because that was my kind of bread and butter. We did some work on devolution, and then subsequently I worked on the 𝗧𝗵𝗲 campaign with 𝗪𝗏 who took me in, so he was my mentor. And then I worked for a longer tenure at the International Center for Ethnic Studies. So that's before my so-called entrepreneurial life starting. So I wanted to pursue a life in policy, but for whatever reason it wasn't really working out. I wasn't smart enough.
I also, while of course going through your profile, I noticed that you worked as a journalist. I believe that's where you went to.
No, it's just a side hustle. I went to Afghanistan to work.
Okay.
But I had the weekends free, so I did writing for the island.
Okay. And one of the jobs was also changing nappies of babies.
Correct.
What was that experience?
Yeah, I forgot about that. No, so when I was doing my master's in Australia, I wanted to take on a job. So my bachelor's was in psychology.
Okay.
And I used to work with children a lot, especially the ones with behavioral difficulties. So there was this job open to take care of a child who had Down syndrome. That was supposed to be my job, but I ended up working at a childcare center. So I took care of like 25 kids as an assistant. Yeah, actually, it's very rewarding. Kids are very honest, so they either like you or you don't. So I did that for 2 years during my master's.
Wow, okay, that's amazing. And then from there, multiple other experiences, and then went to co-found Takas.
Correct, yes.
What inspired you to co-found Takas and finding, see, it's an e-commerce platform, right?
Yeah.
And during that time, internet was relatively very new to Sri Lanka. People were not quite happy with like how they are purchasing online right now. Because I'm sure there would have been a crazy amount of challenges. And people are inspired by you and others also, but mainly in terms of the initial first few organizations that started off the e-commerce platforms, and now there are many. You just go online on from Facebook to all other platforms. You see a lot of e-commerce companies there. What inspired you, first of all, to co-found it, and what were the challenges and how did you accomplish?
So necessity really. I mean, I had a policy background and my education was in policy. So the reason primarily at those days, which is is a long time ago now, was one of my friends said you probably won't get a job in Sri Lanka if you want to live here with your qualifications and your work experience. So that was the main driver for starting something by myself. The other thing was, as you mentioned, at that time there was nobody actually selling anything online for Sri Lankans. Online, like zero. There was a coupon model. There were two businesses which were doing coupon, which has now closed down. And then there was a website which is selling for expatriate Sri Lankans and buy stuff for their loved ones. But other than that, there was nobody.
Correct.
So that was a big challenge. So the idea is generally when you're looking for business ideas, if you are looking for a business or a service or a product, chances somebody else is also doing that. So then I found like-minded people who want to do it, which is 𝗍𝗪 𝗪𝗀 and 𝗪𝗀. 𝗪𝗀 actually was my day-to-day co-founder till we handed it over to Idea recently. So so that's in a nutshell. I also had 𝗀𝗪𝗪𝗀𝗪𝗀𝗀𝗪𝗀, who was essentially became essentially day-to-day. I would say he was a co-founder because he didn't join, but essentially a big part. So that necessity followed with an idea that we can probably make a business work, and then that happened. So yeah, we played, I think, a crucial role in getting people to buy online because we didn't have a store, and we were selling, I think, TVs at the time when we first started, and people thought we were crazy. But yeah.
How did you overcome that? How did you battle that?
I'll tell you. I would like essentially, e-commerce those days, there were two things. If you take Corona, we have two things which e-commerce. One is trust, whether you can trust a website to go and buy it. So if you went to eBay, whether you went to Amazon, you would have trusted it, right? Those days at Takas, people would say stuff like, is it refurbished? Why is it so low in price? So you have to build a trust. Nowadays, it's not that. It's mainly price because people generally buy.
You're very used to online purchasing, right?
Correct. So build that.
So my next question was to influence you to be an entrepreneur, but I believe you already answered saying that there was no job, so you had to force yourself to be an entrepreneur, and it's really cool to understand that. While you take that into account also, you forced yourself to be an entrepreneur. Many youngsters these days, they want to be an entrepreneur because they see being an entrepreneur is first of all cool because the internet has made it feel cool. And they believe that entrepreneurial journey will help you be financially free, which are true. But then also there's a different type of lifestyle that you need to embrace if you're an entrepreneur. There's a different type of mindset that you need to experience. What's your take on that? Because I want to touch from since you sit in the board of Lanka Angel Networks, the land, I want to touch on that aspect. But before getting there, just to understand according to what's the mentality that you think people should have if they want to get into entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so I think we briefly touched on this before we ended up taking the actual interview. Entrepreneurship is, I think, about solving problems primarily, whether you're a problem solver. So you can be a problem solver doing a job. And that's kind of entrepreneurial. You're not just clicking in, clicking out, taking some chances and so on. But let's go with the more traditional view of entrepreneurship, which is starting a business. What I usually say, not youngsters, just to remind, entrepreneurs are more successful as old people. So there is a strong amount of data to support this. So when you're doing your entrepreneurship post doing jobs or having failures before that, you're better at it. But you have to always have a certain level of energy, the distraction has to be low and all of that. But so entrepreneurship is very good. And you'll probably be more successful later in life as opposed to former in life. I tell a few things to entrepreneurs. One, this idea of overnight success is absolute myth. There's no such thing. It's a lot of hard work, and you shouldn't just, everybody wins a lottery, right? Not everybody doesn't win a lottery, everybody has known somebody who won lottery or whatever, but doesn't mean all of us are going to buy lottery tickets every day. Because we know that it happens once in a blue moon. So this idea of overnight success happening once in a blue moon is, I would say, very remote. So entrepreneurship is a hard journey. I say, look, this is going to take a long, long time. So be prepared for it. Number two, you actually don't have financial independence. It's the complete opposite in entrepreneurship. You have zero financial independence to do anything because you can't plan for stuff, right? Because 1 month you might be doing well, next month might be horrible, 6 months might be horrible, 6 months might be really good. So you don't know that. So it's actually the complete opposite of financial. So then you need to figure out why you are getting into entrepreneurship. Is it to solve a problem? Is it to, essentially strive for a goal within yourself, and so on and so forth. So those are things which I think be cognizant about. The last part about this is to have success in entrepreneurship, you need a team. So like, you're in front of me, but there's a crew behind you. So, without that, you're never going to do anything. Number two is entrepreneurships or entrepreneurs need to think big. So without thinking big, you can still be an entrepreneur, right? You can run your 𝗙𝗀𝗀𝗃𝗍, as you say, or but unless you think big, you're not going to. So one of the mistakes I think in Takas we did initially, we thought doing something in Sri Lanka was big enough, but really we should have been thinking at that time, at least regionally, in terms of product, in terms of service. So that's in a nutshell.
Beautifully said, Lahiru. I believe just to put things into perspective, we told first of all, you need to have the passion to drive and also the passion for the purpose that you're driving, right? And then also to, I would say, to have the endurance to go through the distance, because financial freedom will not come. It's right opposite, because while we are running this also, we know that very well. It's the right opposite until you hit a certain amount of mark. And that is true. I completely agree, and I think it's beautifully portrayed in terms of how we have answered. So guys, that's conversation with Lahiru Pathmalal, and we are going to start a crazy segment. It's a segment called Rapid Fire. We are going to ask a few questions. It's a yes or no answer. I believe we have a few questions, like maximum 5 to 6. You might enjoy this, or you might not. But just to understand a bit more, or deep understanding to Lahiru's personality. Ready?
Yeah.
Perfect. So Lahiru, you are a tea or a coffee person?
Coffee.
Oh, perfect. Morning or a night owl?
Both, I think.
Depending.
More mainly night.
Okay. Books or podcast?
Books.
iPhone or Android?
Either whatever works. Honestly, that's a hand-me-down. The phone before the
Okay. Okay, I didn't know that. Okay. So you're happy with anything?
Yeah. I don't have a preference if I don't have to pay for it.
Okay. Mountains or beaches?
Beaches.
And your guilty pleasure?
Guilty pleasure. That's a good one. Probably sleeping in.
Sleeping in is guilty pleasure?
Yeah, man, it is a guilty pleasure. Because you can't, at some point in your life you realize that you can't do that so much anymore.
So sleep is important.
Sleep is important.
Beautiful. Okay. Then so, guys, that's the rapid fire round. That's a quick insight in terms of what Lahiru as a personality is before we get into the tougher questions. So Lahiru, we had been having discussions about entrepreneurship, entrepreneurs coming and getting advices, what are the traits they need to have, what's the mindset they need to have. But you sitting in the board of Lanka Angel Networks, there are a lot of startups, business that come approach you in terms of venturing, in terms of seed funding, in terms of funding. What is the gap and what's the break that you see in terms of when they approach you, first of all, and what is the common mistake or thing that you would advise aspiring entrepreneurs or current entrepreneurs to fix it?
Okay, tough question. But so Lanka Angel Network, while I'm on the board, I had more. So the board decisions and all of that, you partake in it and so on and so forth. And the Lanka Angel Network itself now actually has a fund, and you have the Lanka Angel Network. We have an event every year. It's actually going on right now, where entrepreneurs can essentially put in their applications, and it's called the Venture Engine. And that process essentially enables entrepreneurs to get some funding. I myself is a product of the venture engine when it first started. I think first venture engine, Takas was part of it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Essentially, there is that. So one of the things I wouldn't say, look, it's very hard to say what is right and what is wrong. But there are essentially certain things which come. One is this one point which I talked about, just essentially thinking big, right? When I used to do it, we just did it on PowerPoint presentation. We didn't have a product to go to market with. These days, you almost always need to have a product to go to market with, right? And I will say something which I don't know too much about, but I think young entrepreneurs should be thinking about 100%, is essentially new technologies. And if somebody is coming up now, you need to have some level of, let's say blockchain technology, biotech, I would think, agri. Those are the things which you should be thinking about. What is required in Sri Lanka or the world for the next 10-15 years. And I would read as much as possible on things like Web 3.0, because that's what's decentralizing the world right now, right? You're going from things like hard currencies to decentralized currencies like crypto. You have NFTs, fungible tokens. This huge amount of things. So as one of my actually again mentors and somebody who has invested in Takas and me, Rajan Anandan, I recently met him, and he said, look, this is like the 1990s for Web 1.0. So people should take advantage of that. So I wouldn't go too much into depth about what they're doing right and wrong, but think big, think what's coming up in the next 5 to 10 years, and then plan for it. That's what I would say.
Since you don't want to touch on topics like crypto and NFTs, I will not go there. But I believe, like you correctly told, I follow 𝗪𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀, and he's huge on those. I'm still learning. There's a massive way to go forward, and I believe what you told is beautifully quoted. If you don't know something, I might as well avoid talking about it. But this is something that in terms of a brick and mortar operation and an e-commerce platform, Takas e-commerce. During 2012, it was mainly brick and mortar operation that was running around. So convincing people in terms of trust for having an e-commerce platform. What was that? And currently everything is going e-commerce thanks to COVID. You don't need to have a brick and mortar showroom. You just need to have, if you are having products, you need to have a warehouse and all those stuff to manage logistics. But everything is going online. How do you see the transformation? How have you seen the journey transforming, and how have you adapted to it? And what during this pandemic, what are the changes that you see is coming out in the industry for e-commerce?
Yeah, sure. And this is essentially what we would call a global trend, right? Just not in Sri Lanka. So in 2012 we started about 2013. In those days, nobody knew even how to buy in Sri Lanka anything online. Takas did a lot of first. We were the first to introduce mainstream cash on delivery, which is a huge chance for such a small company, which people do lock, stock and barrel now. We obviously learned it from India, and we just implemented it to get people to buy online, because people didn't want to put their credit card in. Credit card penetration was very low. Then Takas essentially was the first company to tokenize a credit card. We're the first to do e-payments on credit cards and so on. So any company which wants to get into this thing, you have to just be ahead of the curve, right? And what I talked about, the trust element was a big part. That's why you know me as 𝗧𝗵𝗲, even though, at the point of us exiting from that business, I own a single-digit amount in terms of percentile. The reason I was called 𝗧𝗵𝗲 was I gave interviews like this. I took ownership of the brand, because the ones we were competing against at the time had more money and muscle in terms of funding. One was owned by a telco, so they'll just blast everything, have very high top of the mind awareness. So that's essentially what was necessary at the time. And my more recent job as well as the director of e-commerce for Komar, they are a company which does $1 billion plus in revenue. And e-commerce in that was a smaller segment of it. But they too had a huge growth during Corona, because people were doing a lot of sleepwear, we sell a lot of sleepwear, want to be comfortable. So this has been happening, and in Sri Lanka I can tell you, because I know some of the numbers in again digital payments, that's double or triple now.
Wow.
Yeah, so, and the numbers, POS machine numbers are going down. Yeah. So that's,
That's because of the lockdown, or?
I think people are just buying more online, and people are using their credit card physically less. So those are, I think, some of the trends which are happening. So it's just not in Sri Lanka, it's happening in the US just as much as it's happening in Sri Lanka, even though it's a much more mature market.
Also. But my key takeaway from the follow-up question to that, which you just touched upon, in terms of your current job role, director as e-commerce for Komar. From being a workforce employee, I would say you became a co-founder, business startup, and were thriving at it. And then now to go and work full-time for an organization as director e-commerce. That transition shift and the mindset in terms of being an entrepreneur and being a full-time employee, that shift, which I understand, but I would also want to take a learning why. And people don't believe it's possible for us to do, you work, you become an entrepreneur, then you have to die as an entrepreneur. You don't want to go back to the workspace because it's like you're degrading yourself. But you have clearly proven that wrong, because you're again thriving at it based on the numbers we just told some time back. Just give a understanding on that, Lahiru.
Yeah, sure. I mean, everything has advantages and disadvantages, like entrepreneurship in one way, or working, as you say, for a full-time job. But I'm also one of those people who fundamentally believe entrepreneurship is also about solving problems. So, and taking certain risks and so on and so forth. I've been fortunate enough to kind of work so far at Komar, because the thinking is a little bit different. So my direct kind of person who I report is a guy called Will. We have a very good relationship, so I can bounce ideas and essentially get things done. So I depend on them as much as they depend on me. And I'm also working with the CEO, they call 𝗀𝗶𝗃𝗁𝗃. And I'm learning a lot more during this process in terms of what is happening globally, what are the thinking behind it, and so on and so forth. So it depends actually really where you might work as well. So fundamentally, if you get an opportunity to get global exposure, understand a different type of business altogether. Remember, I used to sell electronics. Now we are selling apparel. So different kind of market segments and so on, different technologies. We were on Magento. We built our own kind of ERP. This is essentially Shopify front end. Back end is again another different ERP. So it's just different stuff each other. So that you can't put a price on. In terms of challenges, certainly, when you run a company as an entrepreneur, even though you're wrong, very rarely, you can figure out when sometimes things go bad, but nobody's going to hold you particularly accountable to it in some ways or the other, other than yourself. When you work for people, generally, you have to keep lots of stakeholders kind of happy, make sure that you kind of those deliverables are there. So that's a challenge. But I fundamentally believe entrepreneurship is also being about being uncomfortable, every day being a new day, and this is brought in currently through this particular job. And I'm not going to say, even at my point in my career, I like being uncomfortable. So it's not like when I walk into work now or ever, I've been completely sure of how the day goes. There's always challenges. So that's, I think, in a nutshell. So it really depends on what you might take out of it and whether you're going to problem solve to build something, which I believe I'm doing right now.
Beautifully said. But if I'm to take away from it, it's no matter you're having a business or you form a business, you go for a full-time workspace. working for someone. It's about taking that mindset of an entrepreneur and going and function. Every day you get up, you show up to perform, right? So which I personally believe that's how I also perform, or I also go forward to in my workspace or my attitude towards work. Keeping all work related, we touched all of those. Coming to a more softer side, I've noticed previously it would be from Takas, it would be some on your personal level. We have done a lot of social service aspect of it. One of the key aspects that I found is giving this parcel to the workers, the people in the road who are cleaning the city, who are cleaners, who are hungry, people starving and all this stuff. And I'm not sure if once you did for animals on the street also. What was the drive behind that?
Sure. I think I'm a constantly unhappy person. So one of the things where I'm really happy is like trying to make somebody else's day happy. Because as human beings, I think we have very precious time and so on and so forth. So I know as an entrepreneur I would have made a difference and so on and so forth, but it was important for me to get validation of the time we have, because we are consuming, right? Like the food we eat, the watch we wear, the clothes we wear, and so on and so forth. So I'm not really doing it for the people who are giving me food for, I'm doing it for myself. And I want to just add one more to it. So this part of my life, because my parents have been very kind of philanthropic, I think I learned through them a lot. Always had a house which was open for anybody, did a lot of charity work, and kids learn from that. So be an example to your kids, no matter what good things you do. Number two, most of this was obviously done without saying things to people, to be honest, for a long time. But now I've started realizing the power of sharing that on social media. Showing the people we give it to, and so, firstly, it's great. At the most shallow end of the pool, you get a few likes. You'll mention it, I feel good about myself. But what I've realized also is it has inspired people to do that. So everything has positives and negatives, but the positives of sharing it on social media, talking about it, has had a huge impact. Huge impact, because people are now saying, okay, we are doing that as well. Not just because I'm doing it, there's lots of other people who do it.
For sure.
So that's great. And I have a team which kind of do this with friends, and it helps me keep in touch with my friends. Once a week we share it on a group, what we're doing and so on and so forth. So it's another level of like camaraderie between friends, right? And it's cool to go out on a Sunday, make an hour of your time, and then do a drive around town and do this. So I think those are some of the factors which I'm engaged in. And I also, using my technology background, I have helped, we are doing a really cool project which I want to talk a little bit about. One of my friends is a cancer survivor, a lady called Maria. So she wanted to give back to the public health service. So she founded a foundation for this, 𝗪𝗪𝗀𝗪𝗀 Foundation Trust, sorry if I didn't get the name right. But essentially for palliative care. So essentially, we are in the process of building the website for it. There will be an art exhibition which will happen, I think, this month, soon, both in Colombo at the 𝗪𝗪𝗀𝗪 as well as Ball. So that part of essentially, I wouldn't say giving, just making yourself feel good, making your time to make the other people around us feel better, should be an integral part of billing. So that's, in a nutshell, what we do.
Beautifully said, and I must actually share this experience. My first interaction with Lahiru, it was during the CIM. I was the student president for CIM, and then I was invited for CIM talk show. Lahiru was moderating. It was about e-commerce and the next phase, in 2015. So, me being me, I asked some questions from the panel, and some tough questions. So Lahiru put me in my place, saying that, we are going to work this out, but we'll give you an answer. And I was like, okay, thank you very much. And I sat down. But later on, the interesting part was like you just told about how giving to others and making others feel happy, which I can say you actually do it because I've experienced it. I went to Lahiru and I was like, Lahiru, I work for this organization and I'm trying to set up Google Analytics. I don't know anything about it. Can you help me? So he said, yeah, okay, let's walk down. I have 5 minutes. we were walking down, it was in Ramada, so we just walked, coming down from the hall. And the coffee shop was there, we just pulled a chair and we sat down. He basically took me through the entire Takas Google Analytics. He was showing the number of visitors, the money that was being made, and he gave me a complete walkthrough for almost 10 to 15 minutes. And I was like, wow, okay, now it would have been a Google search, but then learning from himself and him giving that time, I'm truly honored. I think I've not told this publicly, but getting to share this with you itself, it's a great honor. Thank you very much for that.
My pleasure. Thanks for making my day with this story.
No worries. And like always, we are almost going to wrap up, but this is something new that we're trying to introduce for the podcast itself, just to make things more exciting and get people to, engage more and also to understand our guests better. It's called the Final Five, or what we say. Okay? So it's one word answer or sentence answer. It's up to you in terms of how you would like to give it. So the question, shall we start?
Yeah, sure.
Don't get scared. Okay, what's the best advice you have ever received?
Oh, best advice I've ever received.
Yeah.
I've received so much of advice. I really can't
The best one.
The best advice I've ever received is probably, I'll tell you, it's easier to spend money than to save, right, or make. I think that's the best advice I ever received. The only problem was that advice came a little too late in my life.
Okay.
But so the best advice I can give you is, it's much harder to make money than to spend money, right? It's intuitive, but people don't know. So just because you get lucky in your first business deal or your inheritance or however, and you make a little bit of money, doesn't mean that's going to be lasting. So when you do make money, make sure that you kind of save it, invest it. That was told by my good friend 𝗪𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀
Don't say it's to spend everything you have.
No, first advice is, you can have one more beer, you'll be fine.
I'm sure that wouldn't have ended well. But yeah. Okay. We have come out of a very tough situation given the pandemic, right? In the last 12 months, what have your biggest learning been?
I think the biggest learning from the pandemic is, to me personally, that relationships matter. And the pandemic had a huge impact on personal relationships and social fabric. So that's essentially, I think relationships matter, and you put energy into it because it's an integral part of being human.
Okay. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. That's very true. Relationships do matter. If you are to introduce one law that everyone in this world should follow, what would that law be?
Exercise 20 minutes a day.
I thought, okay, I'm going to hear something really amazing that, it's going to be, okay, something going to come from the e-commerce guru. Let me hear this. Okay, exercise. Yeah, I do exercise. I have to do something though, but yeah. Okay. So that's the law. Exercise 20 minutes a day. Really. That's about it. But before we wrap up, what's your one last thing you would like to tell to the entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs before you leave?
Well, I think I touched on this many times during this interview, but just to wonder, if you're in entrepreneurship, try to make a difference. Money should not be the driver of decision making in terms of what you're doing. And number two, think big. Because if you actually do those things, you'll probably be very commercially successful. And it will probably be very rewarding journey. So I think that's essentially it.
Thank you very much, Lahiru. It's been a pleasure having you here. And thank you for accepting the invitation.
My pleasure. It was a treat. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for the support staff as well. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'm sure that's the main staff. Okay, well guys, that's a wrap. And we were in discussion with Lahiru Pathmalal, also known as Takas.lk. And before we wrap up, like always, if you like our content, do like, share, and subscribe, and follow us on all our social media platforms. So that's it. Cheers.